Welcome to Employee Counseling Conflict Resolution. There's no need to copy the flip charts because they're in your handout material, and we'll take questions at the end of the session. In terms of the course objectives, at the end of this session on Employee Counseling and Conflict Resolution, you'll be able to define what counseling is and when it's appropriate to use. You'll be able to conduct a counseling session and write a counseling memo. You'll also be able to identify and address behavior problems and poor performance. In terms of conflict resolution, you'll be able to develop and maintain good working relationships and deal with difficult people. What is counseling? When is it appropriate to use? Let's look at employee counseling guidelines. Counseling is defined as a discussion between the supervisor and the employee about real or perceived performance deficiency or job-related behavior, the employee's perception of the identified behavior, the supervisor's involvement in helping the employee correct these behaviors, and the employee's attempt to reduce or eliminate the problem. The problem could be misconduct, incompetence, or attitude. Let's examine 10 guidelines for effective counseling, which have been issued by the New York State Governor's Office of Employee Relations. First, and most important, plan your counseling session beforehand. Give the employee advance notice. Schedule the session when there is plenty of time to discuss the issues. When you are prepared, the employee will recognize that you have invested time and effort in this important matter. Next, conduct the counseling session in private. Do not allow any interruptions. Focus your attention on the employee's behaviors and performance that led to this session. Discuss only these behaviors and not the employee's character, personality, or morality. Be direct and honest. After welcoming the employee, go directly to the reason for the counseling session. Remain objective without showing emotion. Some employees may be hostile, but you must remain calm, speaking in a measured voice. Keep an open mind. Try to seek a solution or a set of solutions to the problem. Allow the employee to talk. You must be a good listener. Never characterize the counseling session as discipline. Speak positively, not in a punitive or derogatory manner to the employee. And be sure to thank the employee for meeting with you and make it clear that you are available for further discussion or help. Now let's examine your role as managers and supervisors. These terms we will use interchangeably throughout the session, and how it relates to employee counseling and conflict resolution. What is supervision or management? It's getting the work done through others. It's balancing organizational needs with employee rights. Supervisors also have a responsibility to inform their employees about how they are performing. When performance or behavior problems arise, supervisors must deal with them as soon as possible after the incident. What are the causes of performance or behavior problems? There are basically three areas of causes. One is the employee doesn't know how to do the job or lacks feedback. Maybe they lacked instruction or training or feedback on how well they've performed in the past. Sometimes an outside influence keeps employees from doing the job. It could be time limitations or equipment failure or resources that may impact the employee's ability to complete the job. Sometimes the employee just doesn't want to do the job. The person may have a poor attitude, he or she may be burned out, perhaps unhappy, or they just dislike doing a particular task. Counseling is one of three important tools or strategies you as a supervisor or manager can use to improve employee performance and behavior. The other two strategies are feedback and coaching. Feedback lets employees know how they're doing. In private, you state the behavior performance that you've observed that is not satisfactory. You do it factually. You avoid judgmental language. You explore the situation. Let the employee speak. State your expectations and be specific. Feedback is something that you as a manager should be doing all along, all during the employee's career. The next strategy you have is coaching. Coaching is borrowed from athletics. Employees often describe their best supervisor or their best manager as someone who is like a coach to me. Coaching focuses more on problem solving than feedback does. Why doesn't the employee meet expectations? Finding out why and finding a solution is the essence of coaching. And you use coaching when feedback hasn't worked. Counseling is more formal. And of course, you use that. You go to counseling when neither feedback nor coaching has resolved the problem. Counseling is face-to-face discussion between the manager and the employee regarding performance and/or behavior problems, which have not improved through feedback and coaching. It's formal, and the goal of counseling is to correct performance or behavior problems through face-to-face communication and problem solving. However, it's not discipline. Discipline attempts to correct behavior or performance problems through penalizing the employee. When counseling, you have to be consistent. That's very important. See if others are guilty of similar acts, because if they are, you have to take action with them. You must be timely. Inaction may be perceived as approval by your subordinates. Accurate information is necessary. Supervisors' notes are essential. And supervisors' notes are a good idea when you're doing feedback and coaching. They can help you later on in the process, especially during performance appraisal time. Check dates, times, attendance, records, emails. This kind of information is critical in documenting counseling sessions. Be constructive. Counseling is a constructive, positive process. Seek help, if necessary, from your personnel or employee relations human resources office. If you don't counsel employees when it's needed, your workload will increase. Unit morale may be adversely affected, and the employee might not see the problem. Now let's see how supervisors' notes can help you. Supervisors' notes recall an employee's behavior and your actions. Notes track both outstanding and poor performance. Supervisors' notes, or notes to the file, support performance evaluations and counseling. They keep on top of employees' activities, and they serve to jog your memory. Also, you should refer to the handout you received. It's called Counseling Checklist for Supervisors, to assist you in planning a counseling session. Now we'll focus on the counseling session and memo. Be sure to follow these guidelines when conducting a counseling session. Set a positive tone. Clearly describe the problem, or you could call it the improvement opportunity. Ask, then listen. Identify options for correcting the situation. Listen to the employee's side of the story, and take notes. Now we'll just review each one of these guidelines. Counseling is a process for helping the employee identify performance and/or behavior problems, and then finding a solution. Setting the proper tone will help accomplish this. Now, how do you do that? Welcome the employee. Tell the employee he or she is here for a counseling session. Explain the purpose of the meeting. Be yourself. Act in a manner consistent with your normal demeanor. Remember, a counseling session is a problem-solving session. You are not there to attack or punish the employee. Focus on the behavior of the employee, not the employee's character or morality. Don't use judgmental language. After welcoming the employee to the session and explaining why he or she is there, stick to the facts. Avoid sharing opinions and don't get personal. Describe the improvement opportunity. Be direct and clear. Talk about behavior you have observed. Describe the problem in concrete terms, using specific examples. Explain rules, policies, procedures, expectations regarding performance. Make sure the employee understands what is expected in the future. Counseling is not one way. It's a two-way, face-to-face communication. Be sure to give the employee ample and reasonable opportunity to respond. Asking and listening. Ask for the employee's response. Listen to the employee's perspective on the situation. Ask open-ended questions. Keep an open mind during the counseling session. If the discussion reveals that your information was incorrect or the employee's explanation is satisfactory, say so to the employee. Now let's look at identifying options for correcting the situation. Once you've established rapport with the employee by identifying the problem area, explore with him or her ways to improve or correct the situation. Identify options. Reinforce expectations. Discuss ways to improve. Encourage the employee's suggestions for correcting the situation. Make the employee aware of other resources, such as employee assistance programs, also known as EAP. Establish a performance improvement plan with the employee. Include clear expectations and a date for a follow-up session. Listen and take notes. If you've properly prepared for the counseling session, you'll have your plan of action in front of you. Take notes during the dialogue. Notes are invaluable. They can refresh your memory about what occurred in the session and the actions upon which you and the employee agreed. They help you summarize the session with the employee. And notes form the basis for the counseling memo if you decide a memo is appropriate. Now, sometimes you get into a conflict situation when you're doing employee counseling. How do you minimize conflict during counseling? Counseling is personal and private, and there's no guaranteed formula for success. During counseling, it's very important to use good judgment. There may be times when the employee becomes hostile. You can minimize this by being proactive and showing sincere interest in working with the employee to resolve the problem. Here are some things you can do to minimize conflict. Counsel in a timely manner. Look for the root cause of the problem. Always let the employee talk and tell his or her side of the story. Listen, don't interrupt. Show sincere interest in the employee. If you can help, offer help. And if you offer help, do it. Your credibility is very important. The conclusion of the counseling session is the time to review and summarize key points from the meeting. This is critical. Summarize the meeting to ensure understanding. Inform the employee if the counseling session will be documented in writing and placed in his or her file. The memo. The last step in the counseling process is to decide whether or not to write a counseling memo. A counseling memo is a structured account of the counseling session, detailing what was said and by whom. It summarizes the performance improvement process and notes when the follow-up session will be held. You must tell the employee during the counseling session if you will be writing a counseling memo, which will be placed in his or her file. When making the decision about whether or not to write a counseling memo, consider if any of the following are present. Previous counseling has failed to bring improvement. Or you have little or no confidence that the employee will correct the problem without further encouragement. Perhaps the seriousness of the situation requires a counseling memo. Or finally, a multi-step plan for improvement is designed, and the memo can serve as a written confirmation and reminder. What you do after the counseling session is just as important as what you have done during the session. After the counseling session, follow these guidelines. Document. Prepare a memo if appropriate. If a memo is not written, it's important that you keep notes. You may need to recall the employee's behavior and what was discussed at the session. You may need to refer back to these notes if the behavior does not improve and another counseling session is required. If you write a counseling memo, review it. When reviewing your counseling memo, check for the following. First, logistics. These are the elements of a memo that are purely objective or procedural. Be sure to write the memo to the employee. Date the memo, sign it, and add any carbon copies, including a carbon copy to the employee's file. Indicate when you met and who was present. Ensure the memo is written in a timely manner. Note when a follow-up meeting is scheduled in the concluding paragraph. In terms of content, these are the elements of a memo where specificity is critical. Include a brief summary of the background that led to the need for the counseling session. Ensure that the memo notes the specific performance problem and states the expected performance standard. Describe the effect the poor performance has on the employee, on the operation of the unit, and on others. Identify the consequences of continued poor performance. Include the employee's response. Detail the performance improvement process. For example, remedial training, daily reviews, that kind of thing. Avoid slang or vague terms, such as most of the time, supposedly, or probably. Whatever you decide to do after a counseling session, do it immediately following the session. Your thoughts will be fresh and accurate. Even waiting one day can cloud your recollection of the session. Remember to schedule the counseling session in such a way that allows you time to either draft a memo or prepare notes. Continue to monitor performance. Maintain a supervisory eye on the employee. The purpose of the counseling session was to set expectations. Now is the time to monitor the employee's performance. Follow up. Be sure to schedule a follow-up session with the employee. The follow-up session has two major purposes: acknowledge performance that has improved and address performance that has not improved. If the employee performance improves during the follow-up session, make sure you describe improved performance. Listen to the employee and ask if you can do anything to help sustain improvement. Thank the employee. If the employee performance does not improve during the follow-up session, make sure you review the previous counseling session, either from your notes or from the counseling memo. Describe the insufficient improvement and ask the employee to explain. Listen and discuss solutions. State the consequences of continued unacceptable behavior. Set a new follow-up date. Summarize the session and offer assistance. If you decided not to write a counseling memo for the employee's file at the first session, prepare one now. To confirm the follow-up session, make sure you tell the employee you are preparing a counseling memo. Let's now examine performance problems. Why an employee does not meet performance standards is generally due to one of four reasons. One reason may be the supervisor has not clearly communicated the standards that he or she expects to the employee. Another possibility is that the employee has not received feedback on how well he or she is doing. Perhaps the employee's work is hampered by lack of knowledge, skills, or resources. Or perhaps the employee isn't motivated or has a negative attitude. Ignoring marginal performance, which is performance that's just getting by, can lead to poor performance. It's the supervisor's job to communicate to the employee on an ongoing basis. Communicate goals, standards, and tasks clearly. Be specific. Be sure the employee understands performance standards. Communicate priorities and the big picture, how the employee fits in. And let employees know why the job needs to be done, the value of their work. Give feedback. This is very, very important. Let employees know how they're doing on a regular basis. Reinforce good performance. Be timely, be specific. Communicate when poor or marginal performance occurs, when it happens. When an employee's work is hampered by a lack of knowledge or skill to do the job, be sure the employee receives training. Be sure he or she is trained on how to do the job. You must take the time to provide instruction so that the employee can meet performance standards. Provide employees with the tools, information, and support to do the job. Sometimes the employee needs information from you, the manager or supervisor. Review existing processes, methods, and systems to ensure that they don't interfere with the employee's ability to do the job. Now, of course, there's motivation and attitude. That's a little tougher. If you have communicated your expectations clearly and have given feedback and find that appropriate training has been provided, there may be another reason why an employee isn't meeting performance standards, his or her motivation or attitude. One way to assess this is to ask yourself, has the employee done the job before? If yes, then that person has the skills and knowledge and knows the performance standard. Here are some reasons for poor motivation or attitude and ways to deal with them. Supposing the employee is not committed. What you have to do as a manager is remind the employee that everyone's input is critical to the success of the office. Perhaps the employee is not challenged by the job. Then ask the employee for ideas on how to improve the work product. The employee might be one of those who resists change. Introduce change in stages then. Make sure the employee sees the value and the reasons for the change. Sometimes employees are facing personal problems that are affecting work performance. Here's where you can suggest EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, as a resource. Of course, you know you can't mandate someone to go to EAP. Maybe another employee is quote-unquote rewarded for not doing the job. This you must address immediately because if you ignore it, it can infect the entire office. A high performer is sometimes quote-unquote rewarded with more work. You must distribute the workload fairly and equitably. It's very easy to give the harder jobs to those we know will get the job done. However, this often causes major problems in the work unit. There are many performance problems. Here are some of the most common. The employee misses deadlines or does just enough work to get by. Perhaps the employee makes frequent errors or continues to say he or she doesn't know how to do a task, despite having been shown how to do it many, many times. Sometimes employees take twice as long as everyone else to do a task, or they avoid doing tasks they don't like. Be specific when asking for the performance you want. Always reinforce good performance. Give adequate and timely recognition. Point out improvements in performance, no matter how small, and provide support when needed. Here are some strategies for dealing with poor performance, which we just discussed: feedback, coaching, and counseling. Performance evaluation is also another strategy. These are actually a continuum of supervisory and managerial strategies for addressing performance issues. Provide feedback and coaching to employees on an ongoing basis. Establish and communicate performance standards and measures. Write good documentation on performance, both what the employee has failed to do and what the supervisor has done to help the employee improve. Consult with your personnel or human resources office for guidance. Always support good employee performance. Encourage employees to ask for help. Interact with employees in a way that tells them you want to support them. Exhibit confidence in your employees' performance. Provide your employees with flexibility and choice. Individualize your supervision. Establish trust and open communication. Model the behavior and attitude you want from your employees. Improving employee performance requires steady and regular attention from the supervisor and manager. As you address performance problems, remember, communicate with the employee, communicate goals, tasks, and standards clearly. Be sure the employee understands performance standards. Communicate priorities and the big picture, how the employee fits in, why the employee is doing the job, why the job needs to be done. Provide regular feedback, reinforce good performance, and communicate when poor or marginal performance occurs. Identify why the employee might not be meeting performance standards. Is it lack of skill or knowledge? Lack of tools or resources? Processes, systems, procedures that may be interfering with the employee's ability to meet performance standards? Is it motivation, attitude, commitment? Remind employee that everyone's input is critical and important to the success of the office. Challenge the employee. Ask the employee for ideas on how to improve the work product. Introduce change in stages. If it's a personal issue, refer the employee to EAP or at least suggest it as a resource. Do not reward non-performance and distribute work equitably. Now that you know how to handle performance problems, let's look at some of the behavior problems that occur. Basically, there are three areas of behavior problems: insubordination, inappropriate work behavior, and alcohol or substance abuse. What is insubordination? It's a refusal by an employee to carry out a direct and proper order from a supervisor. Insubordination may be active or passive. Active insubordination occurs when an employee specifically refuses a directive or states the intention not to follow a directive. This refusal is usually verbal. Active insubordination can be confrontational. It may even involve threats or assault. Passive insubordination occurs when the employee intentionally does not carry out the supervisor's directive, but there's no direct refusal. Passive insubordination is much harder to identify and more difficult to recognize. If the job is not getting done, look for a pattern. Does the employee frequently forget your directives? Are there regular misunderstandings that keep a job from being completed or being completed correctly? Does the employee continually ignore your directives? Is the employee continually giving reasons why a directive is not being followed? These behaviors may seem unintentional, but a pattern may indicate passive insubordination. Passive insubordination can spread throughout a work unit or division, undermine a supervisor's authority, and contradict or negate established agency policies. It's important that supervisors and managers identify and deal with cases of passive insubordination. Now there's dealing with inappropriate workplace behavior. This is a little bit tougher. Don't try to deal with the employee on your own. If you have an employee's health service, don't refer the employee yourself to the health services. Do not send the employee home. What you have to do is contact your personnel, employee relations, or human resources office concerning Section 72 issues. Section 72, which we'll go into later when we discuss labor relations, refers to a section of the New York State Civil Service law putting an employee out. It's called leave for ordinary disability. When in the judgment of an agency, or you as the manager, an employee is not able to perform the duties of his or her position because of disability, the agency can require the employee to undergo a medical exam conducted by a medical officer selected by the Department of Civil Service. This can only be done under Section 72 of the Civil Service law. And if the result of the medical exam is that the employee is found to be unfit to be in the workplace, then the employee is placed on leave of absence. I'll get into the details of that later. The third area is dealing with alcohol and substance abuse. The potential warning signs of substance abuse can be difficult to identify. The employee may have personal or health problems. Never accuse an employee under your supervision of using drugs. Instead, your role as a manager is to observe and document. Some of the common signs of substance abuse are frequent tardiness, sudden changes in mood or attitude, frequent complaints of not feeling well, poor relationships with coworkers, uncharacteristic errors in judgment and poor concentration, unusual flare-ups of temper, deterioration of personal appearance and hygiene, repeated or unusual accidents, deteriorating job performance, frequent borrowing of money from employees, Here are some things to keep in mind if you believe you have an employee with a substance abuse problem. Don't accuse the employee of drinking or using drugs unless you see them in the act of using. Do state what you observe or smell. Keep track of all incidents in your supervisor's notes. Be familiar with the referrals available through your agency, such as EAP and Human Resources. Remember, stay in contact with your Personnel or Human Resources Department for assistance and guidance when dealing with alcohol or substance abuse problems in the workplace. Now we're going to look at conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is an integral part of employee counseling. We're going to look at how to deal with difficult people. You try to make an effort to change their behavior, to maintain a good working relationship. You examine your own contribution to the difficult behavior pattern. You have to be flexible in your communication modes, and you want to encourage desirable behaviors. In conflict resolution, you want to develop and maintain good working relationships. Most important thing is to separate relationship issues from substantive issues. When two people disagree, two outcomes are in doubt: what decision will be reached and how the people will feel about working together in the future. The decision is substantive. The second issue is a relationship, how the two people will deal with each other as people. You can win at one level and lose at another. In other words, you can get your decision, but make an enemy. Or you can let the other person's decision go, rule, and strengthen a working relationship. What you have to learn to do is separate the two, separate the relationship issues from the substantive issues. Be unconditionally constructive. Don't reciprocate negative behavior. Be committed to forging a good working relationship, whether or not the other person reciprocates. If a person is nasty, you shouldn't get nasty. Do not let someone else's behavior dictate your own. Beware of partisan perceptions. There are two sides to every story, as you know, and many ways to view every incident. Our perceptions of difficult people are only partial. Balance reason with emotion. Sometimes you just need to take a break or talk to a third party. Acknowledge your emotions, accept responsibility, and apologize if necessary. Be prepared. Inquire, listen, and understand. We can't deal effectively with difficult people unless we understand them. Generally speaking, people are motivated by achievement, affiliation, and power. The best course of action is to listen. Consult people before making a decision. When people work closely, what one does usually affects the others. People like to participate in decision making, so consult with those who will be affected by your decisions. When you consult others, they feel as if you view them as important and therefore are more understanding and accepting of your decision. Be trustworthy. People who keep their word are trustworthy. However, even if you keep your word 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be the one time that people are going to remember. Be on time for appointments. Help employees be more trustworthy by checking their progress and performance. Treat disappointing or difficult behavior as a joint problem. Ask employees, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Use persuasion, not coercion. People don't like being coerced. Coercion escalates difficulties. It does not resolve them. Managing difficult behavior is a challenge. To invent a solution both parties support and feel committed to implementing. Accept and deal seriously with difficult people. Let the difficult person know that you are aware of his or her positive qualities. All people are worthy of basic respect, even if their behavior is difficult. Treating employees with acceptance and respect provides the groundwork for improvement. Now we're going to talk about one example of conflict resolution, and that is labor relations. As managers and supervisors, you should be familiar with some of the aspects of labor relations. Labor relations, of course, is the relationship between management and labor. Salary, benefits, policy, time and leave, all of these are bargainable issues. Detailed information can be found in the citywide labor agreement. Basically, there are two facets to labor relations: the grievance procedure, which is initiated by the employee, and the disciplinary procedure, which is initiated by the manager or supervisor. The grievance procedure is basically in 4 steps. If an employee has a grievance, such as, for example, out-of-title work, he or she brings it to the immediate supervisor. If there is no satisfactory resolution at step 1, then it goes to step 2, which is usually the agency labor relations officer. Sometimes the personnel director functions as the agency's labor relations officer. If the grievance is not resolved to the employee's satisfaction at step 2, then it goes to step 3, which is the Office of Labor Relations. And if it's not resolved at that step, then the union, the employee's collective bargaining agent, brings it to the Office of Collective Bargaining for binding arbitration. The agency then must cease and desist its behavior. So, for example, if it's out-of-title work, then the agency must discontinue requiring the employee to perform those tasks, which are part of the grievance. Disciplinary hearings under Section 75 refers to the process by which permanent competitive employees and those non-competitive employees with 5 years continuous service are disciplined. Employees have the right to representation by their collective bargaining unit, and they must be notified in advance of this right. Employees must be given reasonable time to secure representation. Written notice of charges must be given to the employee, and he or she has 8 days to respond. The burden of proof, of proving misconduct or incompetence, rests on the person alleging it. The same concept as proving unfitness to work due to disability under Section 72. Now, if an employee is found guilty of an infraction of the rules, he or she could be suspended without pay up to 30 days. If they're found guilty under Section 75, the employee might receive a reprimand, they might receive a $100 fine, they might be suspended without pay up to 2 months, or even face demotion or dismissal. However, if they're acquitted, the employee is restored with full pay. An important point is that no disciplinary proceeding shall commence more than 18 months after the occurrence of alleged incompetence or misconduct. So if you've let more than 18 months go by, you cannot subject an employee to disciplinary action under Section 75. Now, just to review Section 72, which is the leave for ordinary disability, if an employee is not able to perform his or her duties due to disability, he or she may be required to undergo a medical exam by a doctor selected by the Civil Service Department. If the doctor certifies the employee is unfit, the employee is then placed on leave of absence, and he or she shall be given a written statement of reasons and allowed 10 work days to request a hearing. The hearing has to be granted. It must be granted within 30 days of the employee's request. The hearing is conducted by an oath officer. That's OATH, Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. The final determination by the agency must be given within 10 work days of receiving the hearing officer's report or recommendation. And as always, the employees must be notified of their right to appeal to the Civil Service Commission. Another important point: if one of your subordinates, if any employee, is absent without leave for 20 consecutive work days or more and has no communication with the agency, that employee is considered to have resigned, unless you as the manager accept the reason for their absence. If you excuse the absence, then they would come back to work and they would be reinstated. As far as grievance handling, these are the things that you should consider. Get all the facts and consider the facts, because each decision that you make at the first step of the grievance procedure sets a precedent for similar grievances. Make the decision yourself or get the decision if you're not authorized to make the decision. Hopefully one that is fair to everyone. And notify the employee of the decision. Take action when needed and if it's within your authority. Follow through and record the key facts. Always leave room for the employee to appeal the decision. Report all grievances to your boss, your supervisor, whether they're appealed or not. As far as disciplinary action under Section 75 and Section 72, the purpose of this disciplinary action is to improve conduct without creating dissatisfaction. You want to know what is the cause for the misbehavior. What's the employee's explanation? Why did the employee break the rules or misbehave? You want to get at the cause so that you can motivate for future better behavior. In terms of the disciplinary interview, what you should keep in mind is try to establish agreement between you and the employee. Question employee whether or not or why they broke the rules. Question the employee regarding the breach of discipline. Give the employee a chance to tell his or her side of the story. Use understanding with the employee. Do not argue. Listen. Listen carefully. Do the facts justify the behavior? If the employee is wrong and censure is justified, emphasize future improvement. Fit your criticism to the individual. Tailor your criticism to the personality of the individual. What this means is if you have an employee who's very, very shy, don't come on like gangbusters. Now here's an important point. Distinguish between unintentional error and deliberate misbehavior. Sometimes that's difficult to do, but that's very, very important. Never get angry because you're acting as the agency's representative. Never destroy an employee's self-concept. Emphasize the employee's good qualities and assure the employee that you feel confident he or she can improve performance. Before the employee leaves the disciplinary interview, be sure the employee understands that this subject is not going to be discussed again unless, of course, the offense is repeated. These are some of the reasons that you would absolutely have to institute disciplinary action. If there's any criminal or improper behavior, substance abuse in front of you, conduct unbecoming a city employee, misuse or theft of city or agency property, misuse of motor vehicles, computer abuse, telephone misuse, dereliction of supervisory or managerial duties, time and leave violations. This is probably the one area that we're all most familiar with, and failure to comply with the Inspector General instructions. As most of you know, there's a rule which says you have to file financial disclosure forms if you're at a certain level. And if somebody doesn't do that or refuses, then obviously you have to conduct a disciplinary action against that person. In terms of managing conflict, there are different styles, and you should think about what your style is. There are these basic styles. As a manager or supervisor, you definitely will be called upon to resolve interpersonal conflicts. Many of you already have a lot of experience doing this. And of course, interpersonal conflict involves two or more individuals who perceive themselves in opposition to each other regarding preferred outcomes. We respond in at least 5 different ways: avoiding, accommodating, compromising, forcing, and collaborating. Think about what your style is. Here are the pros and cons of these 5 styles. First, avoidance. The avoidance style involves behavior that is unassertive and uncooperative. This style is used to stay out of conflicts, ignore disagreements, or remain neutral. This approach is a decision to let the conflict work out itself, by itself. It's really a subconscious aversion to tension and frustration. It's a passive style that, if used too much, results in unfavorable reaction from others. It can be useful if it's appropriate for the situation. For example, if two subordinates are venting and talking through a problem that doesn't concern you or your agency, don't get involved, just listen. That's one time when the avoidance style would be appropriate. The forcing style is assertive but uncooperative. It reflects a win-lose approach in that only one person or group wins. This is used when we have no concern for others and our desire to achieve our own goals is our primary concern. This approach involves elements of abused power and dominance. Forcing is not useful in long-term relationships. Others will have unfavorable evaluations of you if you use this style. The accommodating style represents behavior that's cooperative but not assertive. This approach may be useful in a long-term action plan to encourage cooperation. Basically, it's a passive act. People who use this style might be perceived as weak. However, it's useful if the group or person with whom you work has a lot of power and abuses their power and you. The compromising style represents behavior that is between cooperative and assertive. It's a give and take process and can involve negotiation and a series of concessions. Those who use it tend to be evaluated favorably. This style is commonly accepted by many. However, when compared to the collaborative style, it does not maximize joint outcomes. The collaborative style is behavior that is strongly cooperative. It reflects a win-win approach. Both parties win. This style represents a desire to maximize joint outcomes. People who use this style see conflict as a natural process that leads to helpful, creative solutions. They see that a conflict resolution that satisfies all leads to commitment to the solution. They see others as equals, having legitimate opinions. Others evaluate this style and the user favorably. A team approach in management style accommodates this conflict solution style most of the time. Each of us tends to use a particular style more frequently than others. The choice usually reflects a personality characteristic. Naturally, there are other factors such as attitude, the power of others, and the demands of the situation that influence the choice of style. Conflict can be a powerful force that aids in problem solving and decision making. Some of the benefits of conflict. Conflict is a signal that a problem exists. Through the process of resolving conflict, we see trouble situations that we weren't aware of before. We search for the means to change a problem. The process of searching for ways to resolve the conflict may lead to innovation and change. Conflict may make necessary change more acceptable, as well as point out the need for change. Conflict often results in better decision-making and problem-solving. Under conflict. Here's an example. Now, I would love to use the example of the war in Iraq, but I'm not going to use that. Historians point to the governmental policy group that made Kennedy's Bay of Pigs Cuban crisis decision a prime example of making a decision without conflict. The policy group was very cohesive and desired agreement on a decision. They did not consider enough alternative solutions or the entire set of pros and cons before making their infamous decision. They didn't have conflict. No one wanted or could offer opposition to their decision because everyone agreed from the beginning. Decision-making is aided by conflict because more alternatives are generated and more complete evaluations are made of problem situations. However, conflict can also be a negative force if it's never resolved. A leader's attitude toward conflict determines whether it occurs openly and whether it's a positive force that invokes problem-solving behavior. Now, to summarize, employee counseling and conflict resolution. Before the counseling session, develop a counseling plan. Verbally inform the employee, and schedule the meeting. During the session, be clear, be direct, take notes. In the session, welcome and explain the purpose, describe the problem, explain how the problem affects others, ask for the employee's response, and always listen. Explain rules and policies related to this performance. Discuss ways to improve and establish a plan with clear expectations. Set a date for a follow-up session. Summarize the session to ensure understanding. Inform the employee if a counseling memo will be written. If appropriate, let the employee know of other resources. After the session, either write a counseling memo or keep good notes. Conduct a follow-up session when appropriate, with appropriate action for both improved and unimproved performance. Conduct your employee relations or human resources office for guidance if necessary. Some behavior to avoid in counseling. These are some of the common mistakes that supervisors make during a counseling session, which adversely affects the outcome. Not checking with your supervisor or the personnel office before starting the session. Having preconceived ideas about what the real problem is. Letting your own opinions or values regarding employees' choices interfere with your ability to counsel. Sometimes we want to play psychiatrist and diagnose the employee's problem. Or we move from stating the problem right into problem solving without listening to the employee's side of the story. Sometimes we shift the focus to ourselves, or we over-empathize or under-empathize with the employee. Sometimes we make the mistake of rescuing the employee by taking care of things. Often we overlook other resources like the employee assistance plan, or job aids, or training. We can't mandate EAP, but when it's appropriate, we should identify EAP as a resource that can help the employee. Sometimes as managers or supervisors, we let friendship or loyalty interfere with our judgment, or we underestimate the problem, or we're concerned with being liked. Sometimes we use phrases that could be considered discriminatory. For example, I know that you're older, but, and this is not appropriate. To summarize the elements of a good counseling memo. A good counseling memo, as most of you know, is organized and it has to contain the following information. You have to make sure the memo is dated and written to the employee. Detail the meeting information. Note the background information. Include key points. The problem in specific terms. What the employee should be doing and what you expect the employee to do to rectify the situation. Include the employee's response to your concerns and any explanations given. Note the consequences of continued poor performance. What will happen if performance doesn't improve? End with a date for a follow-up meeting. Carbon copy recipients, sign the memo and tell the employee the copy will go into his file or her file. That concludes employee counseling and conflict resolution, and now we'll take questions.
You mentioned before under disciplinary that criminal behavior, you had it listed under disciplinary. I thought if it was criminal behavior or suspected criminal behavior, you had to refer to the Inspector General's office and they would deal with that.
Yes, you do, but you would also have a disciplinary interview, because chances are, depending on the nature of the criminal behavior, the employee might be fired, and you would participate in that decision.
Okay.
Yes.
As a manager, in my own experience, there were certain cases when you never discuss the fraudulent or disciplinary action with the employee until it goes to the IG's office, because it may end up in the DA's office.
That's true. That's true.
So you have to bypass that whole discussion with the employee until such time as the legal issues, whether
true.
it's a
That's
criminal offense or whether it's actually an internal disciplinary situation.
That's true, yes.
And the other point was that in a situation where there's immediate possibility that an employee is going to hurt another employee, you have to intervene at that particular moment. There's no discussion or anything. You have to then go ahead and notify the commissioner or whatever chain of command
Right,
it is
right.
and call 911.
Yes, that's true. That's
We've
absolutely
had
true.
that.
Yes,
I've
yes.
worked on situations like that where there wasn't any possibility where
Of
you
calling employee relations, you're right, you're right. You have to handle it
just
yourself.
stepped in and said,
Right.
enough, this is it.
That's
We
right.
separate. And the same thing with conflict resolution. If you're delivering a service and you have the service deliverer start fighting with the client, or the client starts fighting with the service deliverer, there is no point at which you can then rationalize the situation with either. It calls upon separation and trying to work with the client and then dealing with the our employee later, because the client has
Right.
to be serviced, has to be accommodated before he or she goes ahead and starts attacking the employee.
Right, you're absolutely right.
So
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah, you have to use judgment
you
in
have
these
to use
situations.
best case
Yes,
judgment for these
absolutely.
kind of
Right,
situations.
right.
And then there are situations that just require 911.
911, right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
911
Right.
intervention.
I want to go back to the part where you were saying something about the 20 consecutive days. Now, is this taken from the citywide contract? And does this differ from agency to agency, or is this citywide?
It is a citywide policy. If there's no communication at all for 20 consecutive workdays, it very seldom happens, because usually what happens if somebody doesn't communicate, the supervisor calls the employee at home. I mean, it's a practical matter. But in mayoral agencies, if there's no communication for 20 days, 20 consecutive work days, you can, as a manager, consider that employee as having resigned. As a practical matter, it usually doesn't happen, because you want to get in touch with the employee, find out what's wrong, if there's an emergency, if there's a problem. So it very seldom would happen. But I have seen cases where it has happened and there was no communication and the employee was considered to have resigned.
I'm curious as to how you would define telephone and computer abuse.
Well, I'll give you an actual case on telephone abuse. We had someone who was using the 900 numbers, calling the 900 numbers before we got them blocked. And we fired that person. So that would be telephone abuse. I could see also where in some cases, if people make a lot of long distance phone calls, because every extension is on a report from the phone company. And every single call a person makes, how long they're on, the date they made it, what number they've called, whether it's 212, 718, 914, 203, 201, any area code. But in this case, telephone abuse was defined as someone who was using the 900 numbers. And then they blocked it, eventually they blocked it. So it probably would be different from agency to agency. I mean, I could see in one agency where somebody could be on the phone all the time and it would be tolerated. And in another agency, people are making long distance phone calls and they're under the gun to, tighten up expenses, where someone could be disciplined, probably not fired, but disciplined for that. And in my agency, I don't know about other agencies, but in my agency, we're told that at any time we can go into the computer and find out what sites you've called up. It's for the use of business only. If you use it for personal use, you can be disciplined up to and including termination of employment. And I know in one area, some people were using the computer to do shopping online, and they were spoken to. They were disciplined. I haven't heard of a case where someone's been terminated because of computer abuse, but I could see it happening.
I know in private agencies, private companies, employees are allowed to make long-distance phone calls, but then the company charges them for that and is deducted from their paycheck.
Right.
Is there such a policy in the city? Or could an employee request that,
An
I
employee
have to make
could
long-distance phone
request,
calls,
Yes.
and I'll
yes.
pay for it? Can they
Yeah,
do
an
that?
employee could request it and offer to pay for it.
They do that.
Yeah, they do that, yeah. Even within one agency, different work units have different policies. So one unit, people might be making long-distance phone calls with approval without having to pay for it. Another unit, they might have to pay for it. In another unit, somebody may be disciplined for doing it. So it's really, it's really a managerial prerogative, even though citywide, the policy is that you don't use the telephone for personal use.
That's why I'm struggling with this discussion a little bit. It would seem to me that you would only look at these type of abuses if employees weren't doing their job. weren't performing satisfactory or above, instead of just,
Yeah, that's true.
So I don't know if we.
That's when you would notice it, right? That's when you would
I would
notice
think
it.
we would
And
want to look at that first.
Right, right.
And then you ignore
Right.
because we've all made long distance phone calls, and then you hear stories of high level officials having computers brought to their homes, and printers brought to their homes, and photocopy because they're working at home. So is that an abuse? So.
A person that's taking a computer home is usually the supervisor of that person would be responsible for seeing if there's an abuse, because the subordinate wouldn't be able to really handle that in a sense. And the second thing I would like to say, that when you were talking about handling your counseling sessions, there are times when you may have to make specific preparation to avoid interruptions. Because if you have limited space, you may not be able to leave your office. You may not be able to have somebody hold your telephone call. So it may be a good idea to talk with an employee, talk with one of your colleagues, or have your phone calls forwarded while you're doing the session. Mm-hmm. That's one of the parts that should be really considered before you plan your counseling session. If you can get rid of the phone calls and being sure to handle drop-in visitors.
Right, right. Sometimes you have to borrow a colleague's office, private office, depending on your space requirements.
Okay, I know when counseling employees, especially with negative behavior, it's important to try and do the counseling as soon as possible after the destructive or negative behavior.
That's right,
So
absolutely.
under what circumstances would someone wait 18 months before confronting an employee about something that happened a year and a half ago?
I wouldn't think they would, but this is a policy. This is a written policy somewhere in the city, that after 18
Do you know, is there a
months or
rationale
more.
for that?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Avoidance?
Avoidance, yeah. No, it's a written policy. I don't remember where it's from exactly, but this is a stated city policy that after 18 months, you can't bring the person up on disciplinary charges. And I was amazed, actually, when I read it, because, after 18 months, they've forgotten, right? How could you let someone get away with something for 18 months? I mean, the immediacy is really, really important to discipline the employee or speak to the employee or give feedback or coaching or counseling as soon as the incident happens. Because then it's fresh in the employee's mind and they can't deny it, and that's the most effective type of supervision and management, to deal with the problem as it comes up right away. That's really, really important. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.